It looks like most people have come into the meeting. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name's Amber McGee. I am the supervising attorney of the Family Law Unit at Philadelphia Legal Assistance, or PLA. I am also a co-chair of Shared Safety. For anyone that doesn't know, Shared Safety is a coordinated community response to relational violence in Philadelphia's health and human services systems. Shared Safety is a coalition of city agencies and community-based organizations that are looking to improve services for survivors of relational violence. And this Lunch and Learn series is designed for health and human services professionals to learn more about resources in Philadelphia related to relational violence. To learn more and access resources, including the toolkit you see on the screen, you can visit our website, and that can be accessed via phila.gov. So today we have with us Molly Ferris. Our topic today is human trafficking. Luckily, one of Shared Safety's member organizations, New Day to Stop Trafficking, is a local resource. They provide many services for survivors of trafficking in the greater Philadelphia area, and they offer a 24/7 hotline, which is on the screen. Like I said, our speaker is Molly Ferris. Molly joined the Salvation Army's New Day to Stop Trafficking program, their team in 2019 as a victim advocate. She now holds the title of Education and Prevention Specialist. Molly has previous experience in the fields of child welfare, domestic violence, and Latino-based community services. She earned her bachelor's in social work from Temple University and her master's in social work from Westchester University. She is a licensed social worker who is passionate about labor rights and working with immigrant populations in the anti-trafficking field. If you have any questions for Molly throughout the presentation today, please put those in the Q&A chat box. And without further ado, thank you, Molly. I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Amber. I am just going to share my screen and we shall get started. So today we are just going to do like a very high level overview of the issue of human trafficking and some of the legal definitions and laws surrounding trafficking, what that may look like in the community, and then I'll do a deeper dive into New Day services, but also the other service providers that are available in our area. Okay, so first we're going to start with just some language that often comes up in this realm of anti-trafficking work or within the sex trade or when we're talking about labor trafficking, right? So human trafficking affects very diverse populations. Even within New Day, we see very diverse populations across our own programming. So it can look trafficking can look different depending on the individuals that are involved, depending on where they're at and their vulnerabilities, okay? So you may hear me use some of these words during this training. So if any of the, you hear any of these words pop up, please just let me know. This is just a very brief primer. I know we also oftentimes get stuck in these little worlds of our own, and maybe talking about something that folks perhaps don't understand. So I'm going to do my best to just give an intro of some of the language that you might hear during this training or when you're working with survivors where in your different agencies. So the first one would be date. A date can either be a sex buyer or a sex act. Date in the trafficking world is not date as you and I would know it. So a date can be a sex buyer or a sex act. So for example, maybe a client tells you, I met a date around the corner at 7 p.m. last night. That means that they met a sex buyer at 7 p.m. last night. Or you may hear folks say, I did a date behind the empty parking lot yesterday. That means that they performed a sex act or did a sex act at this empty parking lot, right? So this can either be a sex buyer or a sex act. The life for the game is just common terms that people use to refer to the commercial sex trade. There's a lot of different terms that we use interchangeably to describe the commercial sex trade. It could be prostitution, it could be commercial sex trade, it could be sex trafficking, it could be also um, sex work, as some describe it. A pimp is just another term for a trafficker. We're trying to move away from this language, although pimping is also a legal term. We're trying to move away from kind of fluffy language to talk about folks who are inflicting harm upon others, and we just want to call, this person what they are, and that essentially is a trafficker, right? By definition, is a trafficker. So they arrange commercial sex interactions. They may be forcing people into a life of sexual servitude, things like that. Survival sex is a term you'll hear me use throughout this presentation. This is the concept that people trade sex to fulfill their basic needs. So think of folks that are unstably housed or maybe living on the streets. It may be easiest for them to trade sex in order to, get food or get drugs, excuse me, to support a substance use disorder or clothing or just other day-to-day needs. Coyote or a smuggler is someone who brings a person across a border illegally. This action alone of bringing somebody across a border is not trafficking, but rather looked at as a business transaction. One person pays another person to transport them somewhere else, whether it's across the US southern border or across other borders between different countries. That does not alone, just with those variables, that is not defined as trafficking. Okay, and we'll get into that in just a little bit. There's also the concept of a bottom or a bottom bitch. This person is typically a trafficker's right hand, but they are individuals who have been coerced into keeping other victims in check. So they may be used to recruit other victims, but it's really important to remember that these people were victims first and should be treated as such. So the law defines human trafficking as the use of force, fraud, or coercion to induce another individual to either sell sex or to provide work or a service. Okay. There is one exception to the definition of sex trafficking, and that is if somebody under the age of 18 exchanges sex for something of value, shelter, money, food, drugs, what have you, it is automatically considered sex trafficking. So under the age of 18, you do not have to provide any force, fraud, or coercion because we are understanding that the person under the age of 18 is being coerced by their circumstances, but also by a person who is older than them. So just simply put, the law says that someone under the 18 can't consent to sell sex. And then when we talk about labor trafficking, it is important to remember that illegal labor or service that individuals are forced into or coerced into, like selling drugs, shoplifting, holding firearms, are also considered labor under the legal definition of trafficking. So in order to define trafficking using the law, we use this model that is called the AMP model or the AMP model. AMP stands for action, means, and purpose. So this is a formula that I use in my trainings to explain how we define trafficking under the legal definition. So under action here, you have the actions that are written into the law that these are the actions that the trafficker would take in order to get somebody within this cycle of power and control. So we have recruiting, harboring, and transporting. And transporting right here, I'll say that despite having the word traffic in the definition, movement or transportation does not have to happen in order for something to be considered trafficking. So that means that an individual can be trafficked out of one hotel room. For example, maybe somebody is kept or forcibly kept in a hotel room. Maybe they think they can't leave, or maybe they physically can't leave, right? and several people come in to purchase this person for sex. So this person has not moved at all. However, they are still being trafficked. So that's important to remember. We also have providing, obtaining, and then patronizing, soliciting, and advertising are used for sex trafficking only. So again, I'll go over these. So recruiting means that they have somehow enticed or gotten somebody, the trafficker has somehow enticed or gotten somebody to come underneath their wing and then uses that recruiting energy to then keep them in this cycle of power and control and force them into either sex or labor trafficking. Harboring means keeping somebody in the same place. Transporting, obviously, we know what that means. You can take somebody from one place and bring them to another place for the purposes of exploitation or forced labor. Providing and obtaining. Obtaining means like in the same way that we use the verb obtaining in English when we're talking about services, or perhaps when we're talking about purchasing something. This is kind of like crude language that I'm using, but this is the way that traffickers think. You're obtaining another person for the purposes of exploitation or forced labor, right? Or the trafficker is then providing that individual to someone else or some other entity for their labor or for sex, right? And then patronizing, of course, we have if people patronize a business, it's the same thing. There are people who are patronizing another person in order to receive sex from them. Soliciting and advertising, advertising or kind of being in a place um, for the purposes of selling sex or some type of forced labor. And then we have the means. So this is the means by which the trafficker keeps somebody under their control. So that's force, fraud, or coercion. Sometimes we see all three, sometimes we only see one, sometimes we see two. So it could be any combination or just a singular means, right? And then the purpose will always be for either commercial sexual exploitation, sex trafficking, or forced labor, labor trafficking. Okay, so let's break down the means. So force, I think we all understand pretty clearly. That could be physical abuse or assault, sexual abuse or assault, confinement, keeping somebody in one place, forced abortions or denial of medical care. We have fraud. Fraud is some examples include false promises of working and living conditions, contract fraud. Maybe somebody signed a contract for a job and then they get to that job, and maybe the employer is taking wages or not paying them for overtime, generally not following the contract, right? Selling a dream. So promising somebody a really great life or a great job, or perhaps even posing as a parent figure or a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a partner when they have no desire to fulfill that relationship. They're only using this tactic of selling a dream to get somebody to gain control over someone. And then also withholding wages. So there are various types of labor exploitation that we see within labor trafficking. However, we do still have to prove force, fraud, or coercion in those circumstances to deem it labor trafficking. Coercion is widely defined. The legal definition is very wide and all-encompassing. So coercion is really any scheme, pattern, or plan that is intended for a person to believe that failure to perform an act would result in serious harm to them, or like physical restraint against any person, or that that individual or their family or people that they know would be physically harmed. So we have an unending list of debts. This is something really common in cases of labor trafficking that we see. Survival sex, again, use of substances, threats of harm to the victim or their family, threatening to use law enforcement or immigration agencies against someone, emotional abuse, enforcing trivial demands to demean somebody, or leveraging proof or information of a victim in illegal situations against them. So there is one exception again. If we look at the AMP model, again, somebody under the age of 18, we do not have to prove this force, fraud, or coercion piece to prove that we do not have to prove, excuse me, force, fraud, or coercion to say that they were trafficked, right? All we need is that exchange of sex for something of value with somebody under the age of 18. And that is automatically considered trafficking, no matter what that young person says. If they said, I did it all by myself, I set up the dates, it was my decision, this is automatically considered trafficking. And this is also a mandated report. So you should be reporting it if you are a mandated reporter. So I'm going to show you this video and then we'll go through an example of acts, means, and purpose.
I was born and raised in a small town in Southern Oregon, and I was a good kid in school. I grew up in a normal middle-class family. I got great grades. I was really active in sports, and I even graduated a year early. I was accepted into Oregon State University, and I had my dorm room already assigned, and I was really excited to move up to Corvallis. But that summer, I got pregnant by my boyfriend, and I had to make a real tough decision whether I was going to keep my baby and unenroll from university or get an abortion and keep it all a secret. And that was a really tough summer for me. After I had the baby, I had some friends that had gone up to U of O to go to college, and they had an extra room in one of their apartments. It was at that time that I met a boy or a guy who pretended to take interest in me. I really thought he liked me, and we got along really well. He was really funny and charming, and he had a nice car, and he always picked up the tab. He had nice clothes. He told me he was a record producer, that he had a band up in Portland, and that's why he frequently went out of town. There's a saying that says when you take a child by the hand, you take the mother by the heart. And I really think that's what happened for me, because I had this new little girl and this man who showed this desperate attention towards her, like he wanted to really help make this family that I really wanted for my daughter. And he invited me to move in with him after about 6 months of dating, and I was really excited. And I brought him down to Southern Oregon to meet my family, and everything seemed fine until we arrived in Las Vegas. He said we were moving there because that was the entertainment capital of the world, and being a record producer and having a band, that's where they were going to get the most gigs and the most jobs, and that's where his job was leading him. So I desperately wanted to go with him, to be with him, and to start this family that he promised me. He pulled up to an escort service, and he said, "This is how it works in Vegas. I've spent a lot of money to get you here. I put first and last on an apartment. I filled your fridge up with food, and you're going to need to earn that money back." And I felt trapped. I felt like, how am I going to get out of this? And you didn't know if you were going to live or die. You didn't know what he was going to do or what he was capable of. And so it was really scary. I can remember just running through the casino thinking, like, these people don't even have a clue what's going on. They're just, cha-ching, cha-ching, Las Vegas, yay! And they're doing all this stuff, and I'm running for my life. I'm running from a man that has forced me into doing things that I didn't want to do. When you have a trafficker that's waiting at home with your child and says, if you don't bring home $1,500, you're going to find your daughter out on the corner, I think I was probably more frightened to go home than I was to be in the room. Because if you got robbed, it was your fault for being stupid. If you got raped, it was your fault for not watching your back. Anything that happened to you was typically your fault, and you incurred more punishment for allowing those things to happen to you. So it made you always walk in fear of your trafficker.
Okay, so I used that video as an example, and I'm going to use the video or Rebecca's story to go through the AMP model. So I have the AMP model down here on the right-hand side. So let's take a look at the acts. So I'm basing this just off of the information that she provided in the video. I'm sure there are other elements here that we do not know about, and that's okay. But also this is just like a great tool to teach you all how to use the AMP model, right? Okay, so let's take a look at the X. So there was recruiting. So the trafficker preyed on Rebecca. It's unclear if he had intention to be her partner. I would say no, just based on this video and what happened. But of course, I can't say that for sure. So the trafficker preyed on Rebecca and maybe used that like kind of posing as a romantic partner. Transporting, he brought her to Las Vegas for the purpose of forcing her into prostitution, right? And then advertising. So it sounds like, based off of what she was describing, that he arranged dates or arranged for sex buyers to come and purchase her, or arranged for her to go work as an escort in Las Vegas. And then the means that we saw here, we saw force, so physical punishments and abuse, fraud, again, posed as a caring boyfriend or partner or father to her child, and then coercion, threats of harm to her daughter, right? So there's coercion in the sense of somebody's situation, and then there's also coercion of like with individual actions, right? So of course the threats of harm to her daughter exist here, but if this was a longer training, we could get into kind of like, what do you think were some of the environmental factors that also coerced her into this situation as well? And then the purpose, of course, was for sexual exploitation. So this is an example of labor trafficking that I pulled from the U.S. Attorney's Office. So this is a real life case example. This is from Boston-ish area, Boston, Massachusetts. This is about a um, pizza shop owner who, for over 10 years, purposely hired immigrants who didn't have status so that he could take advantage of them. So I highlighted some things here that really show the force, fraud, and coercion aspects of this trafficking case. He was a Greek guy. His name was Steve Papangianniadis, and I apologize to any Greek people out there because I probably did not do a good job at pronouncing his name. But this pizza shop owner thinly staffed his pizza shops and purposely employed workers without immigration status to work behind the scenes for more than 14 hours per day and as many as 7 days per week. To maintain control, again, force, fraud, coercion here, he made them believe that he would physically harm them or have them deported. He monitored the workers with surveillance cameras, which he accessed from his cell phone, and constantly demeaned, insulted, and harassed them. Verbal abuse. When he learned that one victim planned to quit, he violently choked him, physical abuse, causing that victim to flee the pizza shop and run to safety in the parking lot. When other victims separately expressed their intentions to quit, he told one victim that he would kill him and call immigration authorities, and he threatened another worker by telling him he knew, where the victim lived. When another worker tried to leave and drive away from one of his pizza shops, he chased the victim down the highway and then falsely reported the victim to the local police in an effort to pressure the victim to return to work at the pizza shop. Okay, so everything I bolded was for the purpose of highlighting that scheme, pattern, or plan, right? Because these are patterns that traffickers follow of manipulation, of abuse, of threats, and different methods of that force, fraud, and coercion piece that we see in the legal definition of trafficking. Okay, so hopefully this is a good example. There's definitely, this guy also was charged and went to jail eventually, but he was doing this for over 10 years. So there are both state and federal laws that are related to trafficking. So the Trafficking Victims Protection Act in 2000 was our first federal law around trafficking. It provides guidance and funding for protection of victims, prosecution of traffickers, and other victim services. Act 105 is our Pennsylvania state law around trafficking, which very closely mirrors the federal law, so people can be charged similarly at the state level with trafficking crimes. This also gave human trafficking advocates like me an outline or a guideline for the protections that we have, right? So our protections are very similar to those of domestic violence advocates and sexual assault advocates. We have specialized confidentiality that is outlined in the law, so we cannot release any information without the survivor's written permission. We are also, our physical spaces are protected from people entering them. That also includes law enforcement and immigration. So this is Pennsylvania's first like all-encompassing trafficking law. And then in 2018, we had Pennsylvania's safe harbor law. So safe harbor states that nobody under the age of 18 can be charged with the crime of prostitution, right? So why are we all here today? Because this probably should have been a law for a really long time. It also helps to kind of shape our mandated reporting laws as well. And that's why we do have to report young people exchanging sex for something of value when we do see that come up in our different professional roles. Okay, so there are a lot of overlaps and intersections, sorry, with trafficking. It kind of intersects with almost every social demographic, any larger social problem. So we're just going to do a very like high level overview of how this kind of shows up and what that looks like for folks, right? So a lot of you may be just domestic violence providers or may be more familiar with domestic violence than you are with trafficking. There are a lot of similarities between domestic violence and trafficking, but there are some pretty significant differences as well. So if anybody has a domestic violence background, I'm sure you're familiar with this power and control wheel, this image that I have here in the presentation. Well, we made our own. And this is to help people understand how traffickers use different forms of power and control, right? So within trafficking, there are similar patterns of power and control that are on display in the same way that we see in domestic violence relationships. Oftentimes, a relationship can start out, we start out at a relationship, maybe it turns into domestic violence, and then the domestic violence can then lead to trafficking, right? There are oftentimes similar indicators or similar traits within the perpetrators who do harm to individuals who are either experiencing domestic violence or human trafficking. Victims may believe that they are in a consensual relationship with their trafficker, that they have chosen this lifestyle. So maybe somebody is presenting to you in your agency and they're saying, hey, I'm a victim of domestic violence, but you don't really ask those extra questions to see if there's anything else that's kind of underneath the surface, right? And this is how trafficking often gets misclassified as just domestic violence or just sexual assault because providers aren't aware of trafficking or they're not familiar with this subject. So a lot of times it kind of flies under the radar and we don't have survivors who are being identified, right? And then, of course, the forms of abuse. So on this power and control wheel, we see economic abuse, we see coercion and threats, intimidation, emotional abuse, physical isolation, minimizing, denying, and blaming, sexual abuse, and then the trafficker using their privilege against the victim. So the role of a partner or a family member in trafficking can be varied, right? So traffickers, again, may often pose as someone who's interested in the individual and wants a romantic relationship. It could be a person who's saying, hey, I will sponsor you for your visa here, and then they end up trafficking that individual. Within a marriage, a spouse can compel the other person to engage in forced labor like domestic work, working at a family business, or doing other menial tasks similarly, right? But remember, a lot of people get tripped up with this one. There has to be force, fraud, and coercion to prove that it is labor trafficking, right? Some people will say like, well, if they're working at a family business, it's their family business. How is that trafficking, right? Well, if there's abuses, for example, in this pizza shop example that I just gave you, if the guy who owned that was employing his family members, but was also, physically abusing them, verbally abusing them, they felt like they couldn't leave or they like physically couldn't leave, then that would be considered trafficking, right? Sometimes young people come to this country and are placed with distant relatives or family friends who maybe they've never met before, and then that person ends up being a trafficker. There's also familial trafficking is very common. So if we think about folks who are maybe survivors of traffickers themselves, then become parents and perhaps never exited the life or found recovery, or addressed mental health symptoms, things of that nature, or perhaps they have a substance use disorder. We see that oftentimes as a cycle, right? So those people who are kind of stuck in those areas and haven't really been able to recover in a substantive way may end up also trafficking their children, or there's other adults in the family who end up trafficking young, vulnerable people in their family. Justice involvement, we see a lot. So a lot of survivors have a history of justice involvement or are at risk of coming into contact with the system. A lot of folks that we work with have prostitution or related charges like obstruction of a highway, loitering. Sometimes people are trafficked by gangs and the gangs force them to do illegal criminal activities, which they get arrested for. We have worked with people in immigration detention. We work with young people who are in our juvenile justice system. Survivors are often convicted of crimes when they act in self-defense against a trafficker or sex buyer. And traffickers target vulnerable people with prostitution charges while they are still incarcerated. So traffickers do, people's records are public information. Traffickers use that as a vehicle to then target them while they're on the inside, make phone calls, write letters to them, put money on their books. And then when that person exits, maybe they don't have a safe place to go. Well, the trafficker's right there to pick them up and provide for those needs, right? Substance use, unstable housing, and mental health. This is a lot of times where we see survival sex come into play. Substances are often used as a method of coercion for traffickers. Traffickers will use substances to get someone hooked to control them. So they'll start a dependency or facilitate a dependency in that person. The trafficker may exploit an already existing substance use disorder by controlling the drug supply or threatening withdrawal to the individual. And then substances are also used within trafficking as a means to keep their victims amenable when they do dates, right? If you think about it, and again, like this is crude language, but this is how traffickers think about these things. If you're going on a date with somebody, you want to be in a good mood, you want to look good, right? So a lot of times I've worked with people who have been forced to take ecstasy or other uppers, Molly, ketamine, whatever, to appear amenable or like active or in a good mood, right? All of this I'm using with heavy quotations, obviously, to then go meet a sex buyer. And then trafficking oftentimes overlaps with other criminal enterprises like selling, like drug dealing, smaller street-based gangs, and then more structured gangs with like hierarchies and everything like that. Um, so at New Day, we work with a lot of immigrants and refugees, of course. So it's important to be mindful if you're working with any immigrant or refugee communities that their trafficking could have happened before, during, or after their immigration to the US. A lot of times these communities lack an understanding of their knowledge of rights within the US, especially as workers. H-2A and H-2B visa holders are tied to their employer by their visas. So if that person were to experience abuse at the hands of their employer and then leave, they would be giving up their job. They would be giving up their ability to help provide for their family back home. So you can see how that could be used as a coercive tactic to keep somebody in line. Some immigrants and refugees may be financially dependent on their sponsors, depending on what type of visa they are here on, or whether or not they are in, for example, like a foster home or like a surrogate home for folks who have come here as refugees. A lot of folks experience pressure to repay a debt from their travels or other expenses for their family members, not just their immediate family members, but also their extended family members, right? They may not have a work permit yet, when they come to you or your agency, or they might lack legal status, which again, if we think back to the pizza shop example, that makes them prime for being taken advantage of by people who are familiar with how these communities operate. A lack of language access, right? How are you supposed to report something if people don't speak your language, or if there aren't interpretation services at the agency that you go to? And also physical isolation, right? Think of the domestic workers who work inside homes. There's no HR there, right? Your employer is your boss, and that's pretty much it. Or folks that are working in agricultural fields, if we think about Pennsylvania as a state, your closest neighbor in some places may be several miles away. So imagine trying to report something that's happening to you when you don't have the ability to move around easily, or you were just physically isolated. We also see a lot of folks who are within the LGBTQIA plus community. So these folks experience homelessness at higher rates than their peers, both young people and adults. They lack access to voluntary and low threshold services like housing, employment opportunities, food security, and gender affirming healthcare. They also have a lot of times there's high rates of service denial, or folks experience violence or discriminatory behavior and unfair treatment from staff and other people receiving services, so they don't feel safe going to certain services, or maybe they had one bad experience and they're like, no, no, thank you, not again. So trafficking can happen in many different places. Escort services, illicit massage businesses, outdoor solicitation, residential homes, domestic work, bars, strip clubs, hotels and hospitality, and places of worship as well. So really trafficking can happen almost anywhere. A lot of times it happens behind closed doors, but there are also situations where trafficking may be happening in front of you and you just may not know because of specific barriers, right? So some indicators for trafficking, if you're wondering what should I look out for, if you're working with people who have a long history of reproductive issues like STIs, STDs, or multiple ER visits. In labor trafficking a lot, we see people who have injuries who don't report their injuries and go to the hospital within a normal time frame that perhaps somebody who is not in a coercive situation would be reporting those things to the hospital. Somebody who's being denied access to children, folks who live where they work, the age of entry into the commercial sex trade, someone who owes a large or unending debt to somebody. Maybe they work long hours or report really dangerous working conditions. Perhaps they have prostitution related charges, or received offers to be taken care of upon release. If you're working with young people or vulnerable adults who are trading sex for their basic needs, people who are not in possession of identification documents like a passport, birth certificate, an ID, young people who frequently run away from home or foster placements or other congregate care settings. And then, of course, we always have tattoos, brands, or scarring indicating ownership. I'm not saying that all tattoos are a sign of trafficking. It could be something as simple as a money sign. That doesn't mean that everybody who has a money sign tattoo is, a victim of trafficking, right? We have to take into account everything else that we're seeing with this person. Okay, so there are a lot of barriers to identification for survivors. Of course, there's trauma bonding with the person who is doing harm to them, their trafficker. Just a lack of understanding on the survivor side of human trafficking. There's a lot of fear, shame, and guilt involved. Never underestimate the fear of law enforcement or immigration. Again, they may be isolated, or maybe their cultural values are a contributing factor to their trafficking because they are used to be treated a certain way, or they are used to certain expectations for their gender, for their age, what have you. Leaving can also be very dangerous, similar to domestic violence, so it could cause harm to the victim or to the family.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to make sure that we're on the right slide. I'm still seeing indicators as this slide, Molly.
We should be on the barriers to identification slide.
Now we're on barriers.
Okay. There might be a delay. Okay. So there are also barriers to identification for providers, right? So a lot of providers may not lack knowledge about HT. Again, misclassifying cases as domestic violence. There's a lot of preconceived notions of what a victim should act like, and a lot of times we just don't see that in trafficking for a lot of different reasons. Maybe these folks don't know what information or referral sources are available, which we're going to talk about services in our area soon. Or maybe they are just kind of reinforcing harmful cultural stereotypes when interacting with victims or with folks that come into agency. So there's a lot of contributing factors as to why human trafficking is under-identified in individuals. So it's really up to providers, right? Okay, so what do we do to engage with survivors? So as we know, survivors rarely self-identify, right? So it's up to providers to recognize those indicators and refer to trafficking specific services. So here at New Day, we use the 6 guiding principles of a trauma-informed approach. So we have safety, trustworthiness, and transparency, peer support, collaboration and mutuality, empowerment, voice and choice, and cultural, historical, and gender issues as sort of like um, the guiding characteristics of the work that we do. And the next slide, I will show you exactly how this looks. So what does that mean? It means that we try and give the folks that we work with as much choice as possible when they are identified as survivors. It means that our services are voluntary. It means that we try to be as flexible and adaptable as we possibly can be. Sometimes there's also rules that we have to follow as well from our governing agencies. So I'm not saying that we are miracle workers, but we do our best to be flexible and adaptable because that's what this population needs. We also employ peer mentors, right? And provide professional development for them and try and refer survivors that are interested in professional development for themselves. And we always have an emphasis on safety, of course. So safety means your physical safety, it means your mental safety, emotional, and spiritual, right? Survivors always know or are always presented with a detailed explanation of their rights and of our duty as advocates, working with them and how we uphold confidentiality and why we do it, right? Sometimes we get people who are like, you always ask me to fill this out. Like, it's okay for, I'm going to say yes, that you can share my information, right? Well, these are, restrictions or guidelines that we follow to protect both ourselves, but also the survivor. So it might mean a little bit more paperwork, but that's okay. Right. It's also important to mirror the language that they use about their own experiences. So that means not calling somebody, for example, a prostitute or a sex worker if they're not using that language that's themselves. Right. So a lot of times we have young people present and say, like, oh, I was just, surviving on my own for a while. I would then ask them, oh, well, can you tell me how long you were like surviving out on the streets or like doing your thing? Trying to survive out on the streets while you were alone, right? I don't say, so how long were you prostituting for? Because that's going to be that's going to put like a real knot in the relationship and people just don't react well. So mirror the language that they use. So here's a very wide array of survivor needs, from basic needs to housing, to connection to their cultural or spiritual communities, to safe employment, right? I could go on and on about this. But yeah, needs really look different depending on each individual that we're working with. I cannot stress this enough, but collaboration across different disciplines is really important. Our survivors have complex needs, and it's important that we all understand each other's roles and limitations and how we can help one another to identify the needs and also attempt to eliminate barriers to needed resources for folks, right? It's also important to understand confidentiality restrictions of each agency and the players. Maybe this person has law enforcement involved in their case. Maybe this person is receiving mental health services and you want to, take a team approach with a therapist to support them. It is possible to do that while also following all of our confidentiality restrictions, right? So what can you do, right? So you can schedule a training for your agency, a more in-depth training, or if you're just interested to hear more about our services, I also do services presentations as well. You can implement a screening tool if you work with high-risk populations. You can also join the Philadelphia Anti-Trafficking Coalition, which I have this graphic right here. Feel free to take a photo, scan to register, or visit us at that link. It'll take you to a form, an interest form, if you're interested in joining the Anti-Trafficking Coalition. This is a coalition of providers who work with individuals who are either at-risk populations or they provide very specific anti-trafficking services. So let's get into services in our last few minutes. Okay. So New Day was established in 2010 as a grassroots response to community violence in Kensington. We serve anyone who's experienced sex or labor trafficking or anyone who is vulnerable to trafficking. And this is regardless of age, gender, sexual identity, religion, or immigration status. Okay. It does not matter when the trafficking experience happened. And we can still serve them. So that's important to remember as well. Okay, what is our approach? It is trauma-informed, it is low barrier, survivor-centered, and flexible, right? All things that I've already talked about in those earlier slides. Really important for low barrier. A lot of folks that we work with are in unstable housing, so it can be difficult if they have to jump through a lot of hoops to get services. Sorry. Okay, so you do not need a disclosure of trafficking to refer people for services. If you see the indicators, please just refer to us and we'll take care of the rest. We have 24/7 language access, so we are able to serve people who do not speak English or who are not proficient in English. And we also serve those who have probably experienced trafficking, which means we have a lot of young people who oftentimes do not disclose trafficking, but a lot of indicators have been brought to our attention, so we're pretty sure that they have. Again, this is another piece of the low barrier aspect of our programming. We don't want somebody to feel the need to disclose that if they're not ready. Okay. So we do have a drop-in center, which is kind of where it all started at 2843 Kensington Avenue. That is Kensington Ave and Hart Lane. We serve 18 and up female identifying folks there, trans women, non-binary folks. We do now have an office that's next door. So if you have male survivors who are in the Kensington area or they feel more comfortable in a non-female space, they are welcome to come right next door to our office. We have a little sign on there. So we offer comprehensive case management. We also offer groups. So that can look like art, spiritual support, trauma-informed yoga. We oftentimes have other service providers come in either like weekly, maybe monthly on a rotating schedule basis. And they provide, for example, wound care or maybe information about legal services that are available. So just like a wide array of programming that we try and provide. We also provide for folks' basic needs. So they can just knock on the door, come on in, grab a hygiene kit, any personal care products, clothing. They can use a shower and a bathroom. They can also get meals and snacks, right? So this is just meant to be like a safe space for people who are out on the street in Kensington, who are experiencing substance use disorder or maybe homelessness and perhaps like mental health as well. Our schedule is here on the right. We are sending out our website afterwards. It has all of this information on there, but feel free to take a photo or what have you. This is also being recorded as well. So if you need information, feel free to just reach out too. And if you want to refer people, they can just come directly to our site during our operating hours, Monday to Thursday. We also part of the Police Assisted Diversion Program. This is a citywide program that works with VICE and Philadelphia Police Department. So we received diversions for trafficking, sexual assault, and domestic violence. So we provide comprehensive case management there. We also do outreach to survivors, people who are out in the street, perhaps participating in sex work, homeless individuals. We also respond to community wellness calls there, encampments, street-based prostitution, things like that. Sometimes we also just have neighbors call us and say, hey, I saw a group of women consistently at the end of my block. They just popped up and I think they are prostituting or engaging in sex work. We will go out and try and do outreach and give them maybe hygiene kits, snacks, and information about our services. We also have our community anti-trafficking services. So we have victim advocates that work with both children and adults here. Again, comprehensive case management. We are part of a local task force. And we have youth-focused services here. So we are in family court, within RAP court. We do human trafficking assessments for that court as well. And then, of course, we also provide support, case management to labor trafficking survivors and partner with culturally specific organizations and immigration legal organizations as well. Then we also have survivor-led programming. So we have peer mentors, perhaps they've experienced trafficking, domestic violence, homelessness, foster care, you name it, to help work with our folks who are coming in for comprehensive case management again. We do have a survivor advisory council who uses their lived expertise to provide consultation for us on the work that we do. Sometimes they do community engagement events and are interested in like youth prevention and things like that. It kind of just depends on the calendar, right? We also have New Day, New Home, which is our transitional housing program. So we used to be an independent housing program, but we are now under the continuum of care, so underneath OHS, or in that OHS system, some may say. So in order to access our housing, both transitional and rapid rehousing, people have to complete a housing assessment. These housing assessments for the city are usually completed at access points. However, if you have a survivor of trafficking in your program, we can do the housing assessment for them. So please just reach out to us. So our transitional housing is 18 and up for singles. You can have transitional housing for up to 2 years. It is in a confidential location with 24/7 staff. We do programming on site. We also have case managers on site, or victim advocates on site, I should say. And then our rapid rehousing is sort of like the next step, right? So we also provide rental support for up to 2 years. Again, they continue with an advocate who's providing comprehensive case management, as well as assistance from the advocate in actually finding and locating proper housing for them. And then, of course, we have education and prevention, which is just myself. So I do training for professionals, community members, community groups, and service providers. We train on trauma-informed care, human trafficking, different dynamics and intersections of human trafficking. I just did a series with OHS. We also host community events, documentary screenings, and panel events. And then we are also part of several other citywide collaboratives and working groups, and have lots of partnerships throughout the city, but also partnerships outside of the city as well for services. This information is going to be sent out to you. This is our hotline number. You can call for technical assistance or give it to clients. And then these are our other service providers. So I am sending out the shared safety toolkit afterwards, or Liz will send it out to people who have attended. So this is a list of providers here, and their different services that they provide. Some are within Philadelphia, some are outside of the Philadelphia area. We also have kind of like a loose network of providers that we're familiar with or who have worked with outside of Philly, but also outside of Pennsylvania too. We've worked with a lot of folks who have gone all over. So we've made a lot of connections that way with other important programs. The contact information for these service providers is on the toolkit that will be sent out. Again, lots of housing services that we use. We also use the domestic violence hotline to help with emergency shelter, Covenant House for youth, Dawn's Place. We have some housing providers out in Bucks County. Therapy, we have Philadelphia Children's Alliance and WAR. Legal services, we have Villanova's Commercial Sexual Exploitation Institute, which helps to vacate records for individuals who have like prostitution charges on their records. We've used WA Legal Center in the past for support with PFAs and things of that matter. Support Center for Child Advocates provides advocacy for kids in court systems. And then, of course, we have our immigration and legal providers, but also some of these folks also provide social services. So if you ever have a survivor and you're not sure where to go or where to refer them to, you can always reach out to us. And then this is my last plug for the Philadelphia Anti-Trafficking Coalition. So please join us if you are working with any of these populations that we talked about today. We would love to have you and love to have your support. And I will stop here for questions. I don't know if you have any questions. Sorry, let me stop sharing my screen. Anything for the Q&A?
Thank you so much, Molly. I don't see any questions in the Q&A right now, but we can give it a moment for things to sink in and see if people are percolating on a question. But as Molly mentioned, you will get an email from me after this, not immediately after this webinar, but sometime soon with the follow-up information that she mentioned, including contact information. So if there's a question that you'd rather just reach out to Molly or someone else at New Data Stop Trafficking directly, that is another way to get a question answered. I think I saw someone's hand get raised, but then it went away.
I think Molly's presentation was just so comprehensive. And I mean, truly, thank you, Molly. And it's a difficult topic too, so.
It was an accidental hand raise, so that's all right. So it is 1:59. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming today and learning about this really difficult and important topic. And you will get an email with this information afterwards. And hopefully in the next few days, this recording will be posted on YouTube, so you can refer back to it or share it with other people that you think would benefit.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. I appreciate it.